All right, looks like we have a little bit of an audience today. So this is kind of a special mini series within our Get Gardening series where we're going to talk about home food preservation. So we were just saying before we switched over to live that canning jars and lids and everything are sold out everywhere. So there's a lot of people interested in learning about home food preservation to go along with the gardening that a lot of people have been doing at their home in quarantine this summer. And so today we have Melissa and Dawn is going to teach you how to do that safely. And so I'm going to turn it over to Melissa, and she is going to introduce Dawn and talk a little bit about the Master Food Volunteer Program, which is another great Virginia Cooperative Extension volunteer program that we have.
Thank you, Devin. It's a pleasure to be here this afternoon and to be able to introduce Dawn because I've known Dawn for a number of years, and I'm excited to be a part of this presentation. And before we actually do that, I just wanted to share a couple of announcements with everyone about the Master Food Volunteer Program, which is very similar to the Master Gardener Program, and I'm the state coordinator for this particular program. And we have a training program that is about 30 hours of classroom training on everything related to basic nutrition and food safety and food preparation. And once our volunteers are trained, then they work with their extension agent to help deliver programs in the communities where we have the program available to help our extension agents reach as many people as possible. And so if you're interested in learning more about that program, you can find us on our main extension website at ext.vt.edu. And there is a place for you to submit your name and contact information to me. You'll actually come to me as an email message, and you can let me know if you have an interest in learning whether the program is available in your area or not, because we are, even though we're expanding across the state, we're not in every city and county just yet. And so I can let you know if the program exists in your area or not. So feel free to contact me with questions about that. Also wanted to make you all aware of a virtual home food preservation course that is now available through Virginia Cooperative Extension that was developed as a collaboration with Dr. Renee Boyer, who is our extension specialist for food safety and also a professor in our Department of Food Science and Technology. And that course just became available a few weeks ago, and it will expand on what Dawn will be covering today, and it will include topics related to canning, to freezing, food dehydration, and also with fermentation. And so we also get into the science, more into the science behind why we do what we do and how we do it. And so we have information about that on our extension website as well. So we're glad to be able to offer that course, and it will be open through the end of this year. So we encourage you to take a look at that. At this point, I would like to introduce to you Dawn Barnes, who is the unit coordinator for the Floyd County Extension Office and is also a senior extension agent in Family and Consumer Sciences. She's been with Extension now since 1988, and she has a wealth of knowledge that she shares with us and is one of the most creative and innovative people I think I've had the privilege to work with. I served with her as an extension agent about 9 years ago in Southwest Virginia, and we've done a lot of work together as agents, and then both through the roles that we serve in right now. And so even before coming to Extension, Dawn worked in the retail arena for about 7 years after graduating from Radford University in 1981, and then again in 1996 with her master's degree. And so she brings to this position a wealth of knowledge and experience. So Dawn, we'll go ahead and hand it over to you and see what you had to share with us today about hot water bath canning.
Okay, thank you, Melissa. So hopefully everyone is ready to learn a little bit about boiling water or hot water bath canning. You're going to know more maybe when we finish than you knew to begin with, but there still is a wealth of information. I'm just touching the surface of it today so that going into the class that Melissa told you about or some of the resources that we will be sharing with you, you'll probably want to check those out a little bit more, read a little bit more, get comfortable with the information before you actually start. But I'm going to begin with the science, and we're not going to dwell a lot on it today because we do have a relatively short amount of time. But there's an acronym, FAT-TOM. And FAT-TOM are those things that bacteria need to grow. And we're not talking only with canning and food production or food preservation, we're also talking about food safety and preparing our meals at home. So just to let you know what Fat Tom's all about, bacteria needs food to grow. It likes to grow in low acid environments. Temperature from 41 degrees to 135 degrees is a danger zone, and that's one of the reasons we say don't leave things at room temperature very long. Time and how long things are out in our process, in our point, how long are things processed? That's also a time issue. Oxygen, just like us, most of it needs some oxygen. One of the things that we are, and excuse me, M is moisture. But when we're talking about food preservation, one of the things that we are concerned about is, and it's a tongue twister, Clostridium botulinum. And that is what botulism, how botulism comes to be. It does not need oxygen. So even with our canned products, it can continue to be an issue. And that's why we need to make sure we are using the correct process, be it the boiling water bath that we're talking about today, or the pressure canning you're going to learn about, I think, in another week, making sure you have the right process with the right product. So I'm going to begin by just sharing with you some of the equipment. And of course, with boiling water bath, one of the things is going to be a canner. And most often you see the enamel ones. If I'm using a small batch, I sometimes will use a large stock pot. The key is you want the jars to fit in. Usually you'll have a rack, and this one has a rack you'll see in just a little bit. You need about 1 to 2 inches above the jars, and then another 1 or 2 inches above that, because the water is going to be boiling, and you want to make sure that there is room for that water to move around. Some of the other things that are important, of course, the jars. So there are quart jars that you will see most often. Also, you have pint jars. This one, I'm sure, doesn't show up real well, but it's a wide mouth. This is a regular mouth. Either one is fine, doesn't make a bit of difference. You also will see, especially when you're talking about jams and jellies, a half pint. And sometimes there's a little small one that people use, but it also would have to be, the directions are only pint directions and quart directions, so you'd have to use one of those. A question we often get is, well, what about the jar that says Mason that my spaghetti sauce came in from the store? Well, even though it says Mason, because we've always said it needs to be a Mason jar or a canning jar, just because it says Mason, it isn't going to be ideal for doing the home food preservation. One of the issues is the top of it. You may think that the ring and the lid are adhering or fitting well, but it doesn't always provide a real good seal. It's also not constructed to go through the home canning process. So that is unfortunately one of those things that shouldn't be used. If you are in the stores and are looking, you may also see half-gallon jars. Half-gallon jars are great for storage, but food preservation, the only thing that's suggested is apple juice and grape juice. So don't look at those and think, yes, I can do a big thing of applesauce and I only have to can it one time. No, not going to work, not going to be safe. You want to make sure your family's safe. So some of the other things that you might need are lemon juice and vinegar. These are going to be two of your acidity things that are going to be called for in the recipes possibly. When you're using lemon juice, it needs to be bottled lemon juice, because that's the only way we can ensure that it has the acidity level that we need to have. As we all know, you bite into a lemon, one may be have more bite, more acidity than the others. So the bottled allows us to have that guaranteed acidity that we need. Vinegars, when you're looking at your vinegars, it needs to be 5% acidity. And that will show on the label. Just make sure that it has that on there. Along with that, if you're making jams and jellies, a pectin, that's what's going to make the jelly firm up. Some of them have sugar. Some of them have very little sugar. Some of the recipes may use the fruit's own natural pectin. It's all personal preference. Just follow the directions. I mentioned sugar. You will need sugar in some cases when you're doing some of the pickling and some of the jams and jellies or fruits. Also salt. And when you're using salt, you need canning salt. Yes, basically salt is salt, sodium. But with your canning salt, it doesn't have the additives. So if you've ever seen someone that has a jar of pickles that they home can and they maybe look a little cloudy, chances are they didn't use canning salt, and that was some of the additives, maybe the anti-caking agent that is sometimes used in salt that makes it that real icky looking. Spices are one of the things that a lot of our recipes will refer to. And then also citric acid. Citric acid is in a powdered form. And even though tomatoes are an acidic vegetable fruit officially, it does need a little bit of citric acid or a little bit of lemon juice added to the product because the varieties of such that the acidity level varies. And by adding this, we know we have an acidity level at the level that we need to safely provide a product. And then you can find, if you want to make it as simple as possible, you can find bag mixes now that make it very simple. Follow the directions on the back, add the mixture, and go forth, and you can have your canning product. As I said, timing is very important. So having a timer might be one of those things that you want to have on hand. And growing up as a child, sometimes I was a timer. Mom would say, let me know when. Other things that you might need, a ladle, because we may have some liquids going on that. The jar lifter, and you'll see how this can be used in just a little bit. Along with the jars themselves are the lids, and the lids that we use traditionally are a two-part lid that has a seal around it. Check your lid instructions. Some of them have changed a little bit as to whether or not you need to put them in boiling water, very hot water, or just use them out of the container. So be aware of that. A jar filler. You may not need one. You may not be messy. Trust me, a jar filler makes life a lot easier and mess is a lot less. You will have to have either a bubble-free or somewhere. You can buy them, or you can just use a plastic knife. Plastic knife, not metal. And I'll show you how you're going to be using it, but you're going to be using it inside the jar. And over time, a metal knife can cause some harm to the jar and possibly break some pieces off in it. And you don't want that in your product, obviously. This one also, we want to talk about headspace, but this one also has some stair steps at the top or the bottom, whichever one you want to turn it, that help you with the headspace. And again, I'll explain headspace in just a second. A really neat thing that they came out several years ago is a lid wand. It is magnetic and it will lift the lids up so you don't have to touch them and you can put them right on the jars themselves. So these are some very important pieces that we need to have, but obviously you need to also have a product. Now, as I said, acidity is one of the keys. When we're talking about boiling water bath, we're talking about a product that has a higher acidity level. So a higher acidity level would be 4.6 or lower. So some of the things that we might be able to use would be our berries. We could use peaches, apricots, pears, some of our cherries, apples, applesauce, tomatoes. Those are the things that you can use with the boiling water bath. Now, as I mentioned earlier, the tomatoes need to have a little bit of citric acid or lemon added to be ideal for that canning. So question sometimes is, well, what about cucumbers? Are they high acidity? No. What about green beans? Are they high acidity? No. But if I take a cucumber, or in this case, it's green tomatoes. It's a green tomato pickle recipe that I really love, and pickles, or green beans. And I don't know if you've ever heard of a product called dilly beans or dill green beans. That's what these are. A product like the cucumbers or the beans, or in the case of pickled beets, the beets, you are taking a low acid product and you are acidifying it by adding that mixture of vinegar, and it may have some sugar or water or whatever the case may be. But you're using a research-based recipe. You're not just trying to make something up, because you want to make sure that the acidity is at the level that's going to have a safe product in the end. Just a couple of other things while I have these down here. Jellies and jams are one of those things that are going to be processed by boiling water bath. Your fruit, these are some pears that were used with the boiling water bath. These are all pints or half pints, and that's personal preference and size of my family. There's no reason you can't do these in a quart. It just depends on what your preference is and what fits with your family size. So I'm going to walk through the process of what you would be doing if you were indeed going to be doing some canning. So if I were getting ready, one of the things I would do would be have my water in my can or whatever size, whatever one I'm using. The ones that when you're using, you want to make sure it's no bigger than about 4 inches bigger than your burner, because then you're not going to get your heat. I also need to make sure that the range is one that can be used. I have a gas range, that's no problem. Some may have an electric range, that's no problem either. But it is a problem if you have a flat top range. Most of the flat top ranges are not conducive because of safety, of the heating or breaking the top of the flat top range. So you need to check with the manufacturer to see if it is acceptable, for doing the canning on it or not. But in most cases, it is not. So again, read the resources, read your directions, and make sure you can use whatever it is you have. But I should have water in it, and remember, my water needs to be 1 to 2 inches higher than my jar. So if I'm doing quarts, it needs to be 1 or 2 inches higher than that. If I'm doing pints, obviously it can be a little bit less in height. So that's warm, hot. It's ready for me here in a little bit. One of the keys with all of our equipment, it needs to be warm. It needs to be cleaned, sanitized, ready to go. When we are doing some of our canning, we will have, not everything, but in some, we have an option of doing either a raw pack or a hot pack. So today, what I'm going to show you is a raw pack. I'm simply using the product, putting it in the jar, and then putting the liquid, be it water, syrup, light syrup, or heavy syrup, over top of it. If it were a hot pack, I would be cooking the product and the liquids together, and then putting that together into my jar. So I have jar, as I mentioned, good old jar filler, because as I said, I am picky. And hopefully I have a recipe nearby I have read, and I know exactly how much headspace I need. And for this, I need a 1/2 inch headspace. So that means I need it about a 1/2 inch away from the top. Now, of course, it's always important to shake these a little bit, because, you know, the fruit has a way of not fitting in the way you want it to fit. And if I look, and yes, I have washed my hands also, this one is too big, but there's some small ones in here. And a 1/2 inch headspace, I think, is going to be, yes, I'm within my 1/2 inch headspace. So I have the product. Now I need to pour in the water, the syrup, whatever it is that you're going to be using. And again, as I pour that in, that also needs to not come up any more than my 1/2 inch headspace. After a while, you get it down pat, and you know exactly where that headspace of what 1/2 inch is and what the 3/4 inch or the 1/4 inch is. Jams and jellies don't use as much, but just to be safe, it always helps to measure. Okay, now, bubble freer. I'm simply running this around the edge, because in between those fruit, I may have some extra bubbles. And I want all the bubbles out ahead of time so that it doesn't cause any problems as it's in the canner. So my product is in, liquid's in, and especially if this were a syrup, I want to take a damp paper towel and go across the top. And the reason I do that is if by chance there were a little bit of that sugar residue on the top, it could make a difference in the seal and the lid and the seal with the jar, so that it wouldn't seal. And what I want is to make sure everything seals and I have no problem. Ring next, rings again need to be cleaned, free of any rust or anything. And you're going to twist to just past that point of resistance. Just when it starts to give you that little bit of resistance, you stop. It's not a show of strength. Unfortunately, if you tighten it down too far, you will have the seals. Sometimes the jar lids will buckle or the seals won't be correct. And that's all you need to do. So the canners have a rack in them. And you can also oftentimes buy racks that go into a stock pot if you were going to use that as your canning. Jar lifters. So jar lifter goes around the top. The pressure that you have on the top keeps it in. You lift it over. And at that point, once you have it all filled, this goes in. The lid goes back on. And you want to bring it to that boiling, rapid boil, not just a little the blip blip, but a lot of the bubbles going really crazy and haywire. You want the boiling water. Now, how long do I keep it in there? And I start timing, not when I put it in, but when I get the water to that boiling point again. One of your resources is going to tell you exactly what I need to do and how long. So one of the keys that we need to be aware of also is our altitude. So I'm located in the New River Valley of Virginia, which means we have a little bit of mountains and a little bit of hills. So I am above the 1,000 feet altitude. Most of the books you will find will give the directions for 1,000 feet. If you are above 1,000 feet, you need to go into the book and find exactly what you need for that particular altitude. So when I look at my resource, and I'll share one of these with you in just a second, for raw pack berries, whole berries, and it will make a difference what you're doing, whether it's whole or doing a syrup or whatever. In this case, pints and quarts are going to be different. So I'm doing a pint and I would need it to be in there for 20 minutes. If by chance I were doing quarts, which is the way we were raised having a larger family, that would be 25 minutes. Now, I have a little story to tell with you. Growing up, we were doing blackberries. We washed the blackberries. We canned the blackberries. And afterwards, we opened up a can and we made blackberry cobbler. And as I was eating my blackberry cobbler, I came upon a crunch that felt just a bit crunchier than what a blackberry seed should crunch. And as I checked out what I was crunching on a Japanese beetle that somehow or another had made it through all of our washing process, all of our filling process. Well, it wasn't exactly tasty, but the blackberries were. And just to give you an idea that, sometimes weird things happen, but please wash your berries well and make sure that doesn't happen. So if 20 minutes had passed and I've been watching and making sure that it had been boiling, then I'm going to take the lid off, turn the water down, or if I have something else off or down, depending on whether or not I have something else to go in. And again, I'm going to take the jar fillers. Now, you need to have the preparation of the area where you are with a towel. And the towel does a couple of different things. One, it gives it a soft surface to fall on. It also makes sure that your temperature is not a distinct difference. If you think about what happens when you put something hot and something cold and you've had things break, you don't want that to happen once you've gotten to this point. You also want to make sure that, canning is a hot process to do. So you don't want to make sure you don't have a fan blowing over the area or you're right over the air conditioning event, because that's going to give a cold blast of air that may also give the jars a problem. So you've let them set just a little bit in the canner, and then you're going to lift up. And you're not tilting because you don't want to mess up with the possibility of the seal, and set down. I sometimes will have a towel in front of me just in case I do have a spill. And I do try not to be barefoot or wear sandals just in case I do have something break, because that's a pretty dangerous burn that's going to be happening if that happens. They can sit for 24 hours. Hopefully you want to hear the little pop sound that says you have a successful seal. After that 24 hours, then you can pick them up and you can put them into wherever your storage area is going to be. The rings can come off and be washed, and that way they don't rust if you're doing some pickles and had some pickle juice on them. You can use them more and not have to buy lots and lots of rings just to have to buy the lid. So that is one of the things that you can do also. If by chance something happened and one of them didn't seal, you could choose to reprocess it within that 24 hours, knowing that the product's going to be a little bit different, or just put them in your refrigerator, and that's going to be the apple cobbler or the blackberry cobbler or the pickles for the picnic the next week. So go ahead and use them from the refrigerator fairly soon. So as I said, we've quickly gone through things, giving you a little bit of information about the process and how you would go about it and some of the procedures. But now where do you go for information? So a cooperative extension has several publications that you can go through. This is the one on boiling water bath. It goes through step by step. This one talks about canning in particular so that you know about the altitude and whether you do water bath or whether you do pressure. The University of Georgia Cooperative Extension has a book called So Easy to Preserve. At one point, they had some videos also that could be purchased, and I haven't checked recently to see if they're still available. We probably all know the Ball Blue book. That's probably something that families and generations have used. If you had anybody in your family that did something with the canning process before. There's also the National Center for Home Food Preservation. And one of the things you can find on that site is the USDA's home canning book. And it walks you through step by step. It's one of the ones that I like. And I enlarged it and I know you still probably can't see it, and that's okay. But maybe it will make you more interested to go check it out and see what it really looks like so you can see it. But this is a page and it's talking about doing pickles. So the thing I really like about it is right here, it has a table, and in that table, it tells you whether it's raw pack or hot pack, what the altitude and how much time at that altitude you should be processing your product. So you don't have to go look for it if you're at an altitude higher than that 1,000 feet. As we said earlier, research-based information is very important. And I'll give you an example. So you think there's a recipe that you've used or your family's used for generations, and you want to use it, but it is something that maybe somebody created, or you don't know where the resource was to start with. And an example might be my grandmother made French pickles. It's basically a green tomato and onion pickle. Loved them. It has very fond memories. But I don't know where that recipe came from. The Ball Blue book had one for green tomato pickles. The spices were different in my grandmother's recipe than they were in the Ball Blue book. So I used the Ball Blue book's recipe so that I knew I had the ratio that I need to vinegars and sugars and everything on it. But I did change the spices just a bit, but I changed the type of spice, not the amount. So if it called for a tablespoon of spice, I didn't do anything more with it than that spice. So I really didn't change the acidity of that particular product. So use a current source. Please do not use some of those old 1940s and 1950 books that we may have on our shelves, because they are not possibly changed to what the new recommendations are and what some of the new requirements are, because they do change. When I was growing up and until about, I think 9 years ago, maybe, tomatoes did not have to have anything added. And that's a fairly new, relatively new 9 years change. And so you have to keep up with what is happening in the arena, in the area, so that you make sure that product is a safe product for your family. And you will indeed have something to enjoy through the winter months when the gardens are not growing anymore. So Devin, I think maybe you had some questions. I think I've covered most everything. So if there's any questions that maybe I could answer.
Thank you so much, Dawn. That was great. Yep, we do have a number of questions here, and I apologize for this. Someone's hammering outside my office.
That's okay. There's thunder here earlier, so.
So the first thing, somebody wanted to know what fruit that was that you just demonstrated with.
Oh,
So,
I'm sorry.
Blackberries.
They're blackberries.
Okay, our second question here. Why aren't half-gallon jars good for anything except juice?
So one of the things when we're doing our food processing with the boiling water bath and with the pressure canner is you need to get the inside to a particular temperature. And there is not the successful process of getting the a half gallon jar, the content to the temperatures it needs to be. So while it might fit in the canner, it might look like it works. We don't know that the inside is giving you the safe product that you need. And likewise, and I said things change. Years ago, we canned summer squash. Summer squash, as it is no longer, and it was a pressure canning recipe, but it's still not suggested any longer because there was a concern with the inside of that getting to the temperature that it needed to be. So please keep current on the products and what's being used.
Another question, can you use any pot for water bath canning, or do you have to have a special water bath pot?
No, like I said, oftentimes you will see the enamel ones. I oftentimes use a stock pot. I say a stock pot, but it's just a metal pot that's large that I sometimes use for large batches of soups. The key is it needs to be something that fits your burner, no larger than 4 inches larger than the burner. It also needs to be something that 1 to 2 inches above the jar of moisture, of water, and then you need to have another 2 inches or so above that so that the water does have room to boil. And ideally, you want to have a rack or something on the bottom. You don't want the jars on the base so you don't have that heat to heat contact or jar to heat contact.
Okay, so a third question here. If you make refrigerator pickles and you have them in your refrigerator, could you go back and seal them using water bath canning a couple days later?
If there are instructions, again, you need to have a recipe for that particular product. Refrigerator pickles usually are the recipe is for the refrigerator. So if they, not without knowing the recipe, I would, part of my tendency would be saying no, because you don't know that recipe is going to meet the requirements for long-term storage. They were made for the refrigerator and for shorter term storage. If you like the taste of them, then I would suggest going to any of the resources that I shared with you to find a recipe that has some of the similar flavors and then process that one.
Okay, I have a question. This is my own question. So when you get the jar out of the water, sometimes there'll be like a little bit of water left on the top of the lid when you go to put it down. Mm-hmm. Should you leave that water or should you try and like soak it up?
I usually just leave it because oftentimes the heat will just kind of evaporate it. And I don't want to be adding pressure or anything to the lid and possibly cause it to not seal on its own, but form a seal that might not be a safe seal.
Okay. Now this is a really good question. Somebody wants to know if they have a flat top stove and they don't have a pressure canner, what alternative could they use, and could they use an Instant Pot?
No, Instant Pots unfortunately do have an option there for canning, but they are not at the temperatures and the length of time that it needs to successfully have a research-based successful product. So we do not suggest that the Instant Pots be used for canning. There is a manufacturer that does for boiling water bath that does an electric boiling water bath canner. So you can buy it and put the water in it, it's plugged in, and you don't have to have the stove or the range in that situation.
Okay, and then this is a good question, kind of segues into next week's presentation, which is going to be on pressure canning. So what is the difference between water bath and pressure? Is it just the temperature that the food is getting to inside the jars?
So yeah, the temperature is one of those things, most definitely. So when you're doing the boiling water bath, it's going to be at that boiling temperature of 212 degrees. And when you're doing the pressure canner, it reaches 240 degrees. And obviously you need the help with the pressure to get the pressure canner to that temperature. And of course, the product with being low acid and high acid.
Awesome. And if anyone is wondering about pressure canning, we're going to have a presentation next week that's going to be all about pressure canning. So join us next Thursday at 2 p.m. Back here for that. And then the week after that is going to be the final in our little mini series of home preservation presentations, and that's going to be freezing. So also a great alternative, especially if you're having trouble finding jars or lids. Freezing is always something that you can do as well. So I just want to say thank you to Dawn and Melissa. Again, that was a really great presentation. Hopefully all of y'all out there have plenty of tomatoes and things you can pickle from your gardens this year. And this will be a helpful presentation for you. And we'll see you next week. Thanks.
Thank you all.